Hello again, it's me Chaz back with another video, back with another episode of Group Games where I talk about all the groups in the 2026 World Cup. Previous two videos I made, I was discussing Group A and Group B. Both of those groups happen to have a host nation for the 2026 World Cup. Group A had Mexico in. This will be the third time they're hosting a World Cup. Their best at the World Cup has been reaching two quarterfinals. Those two quarterfinals were the World Cups that they did host back in 1970 and 1986. And in Group B, we have Canada in Group B. This is the first time they're hosting a World Cup. They made their debut back in 1986 and returned to the World Cup back in 2022, but haven't made it out the group stage, haven't won a game as well, lost all 6 of their ties. Okay, now the third nation that is co-hosting the World Cup with these two is the USA, but they're in Group D. So we are discussing Group C in this video, and even though this group doesn't have a host nation in it, it isn't lacking. This group is the first group that I'm going to mention that has all 4 nations confirmed, Group C. And when I said this group isn't lacking, first nation I'm going to mention in this group is the 5-time champions of the World Cup, winning a World Cup for the first time back in 1958 in Sweden, beating the host nation in the final. That is Brazil. They themselves have hosted a World Cup on 2 different occasions, first in 1950 and again in 2014, reaching the final 4 in both of those tournaments. And Brazil are also the only nation to compete at every World Cup, competing in the first World Cup back in 1930 in Uruguay. The other nation in this group is Morocco, who reached the semi-finals of the previous tournament back in 2022 in Qatar. May became the very first nation in Africa to ever reach the final 4. And they have most recently and controversially have been crowned as the champions of the 2025 AFCON. And the other 2 nations in this group, both making a return to the World Cup. First, we have Haiti, who made a debut at the 1974 World Cup back in Germany, but haven't returned to the World Cup since then. And the other nation in this group making a return to the World Cup since 1998, and that nation is Scotland. Okay, let's start with the 5-time champions, which is a record, by the way. Brazil competed, as mentioned before, and every World Cup starting in 1930. They won their first World Cup in 1958. Brazil beat Sweden, who were the hosts of that World Cup. Brazil becoming the first nation to actually win the World Cup outside of their continent, winning it in Europe. Of course, Brazil being a South American nation. Brazil would then go on to win the World Cup 4 years later in 1962 in Chile. Brazil became only the second nation, Italy being the first, to ever retain the World Cup. And they're also the first nation to win the World Cup on 2 different continents. They then won the World Cup for the 3rd time in 1970. In Mexico, this was the first time that Mexico did hold the World Cup, and the first time the World Cup was hosted in North America, in a nation that's part of the CONCACAF. And that's a 3rd continent that Brazil was able to win the World Cup in. With that win as well, Pelé became the first and only player to ever win the World Cup on 3 different occasions. 1994 was the 4th time that Brazil would win the World Cup. They won it in the USA. As the first time the USA did host the World Cup. They beat Italy on that occasion. And that would be the 2nd time that Brazil did beat Italy. They beat them in 1970 at that World Cup. Should also completely forgot, 1962 they beat Czechoslovakia at that World Cup. And finally, The last time that Brazil did win the World Cup, that was in 2002, where it was hosted in Asia for the first time. South Korea and Japan were the hosts for that World Cup, which meant 4 out of the 5 World Cups Brazil have won. They've won it in 4 different continents. And they are the only nation to ever do that. But since then, there has been a bit of a struggle for Brazil. They haven't reached a final since, and the last time they reached a semi-final, which was in Brazil, they had a humiliating defeat by the Germans. That was 7-1. And in the previous tournament, they lost to Croatia on penalties. They got knocked out. So Brazil definitely trying to bounce back from this World Cup. Again, the last time it was hosted by the USA, Brazil did win that World Cup. Maybe they got Don Ancelotti, so maybe they have a chance. They do have solid players. They do have some really good talent. I'm not sure if that might be enough. They didn't have the most successful World Cup qualifying campaign, to be fair. Definitely a lot of ups and downs for them. I don't think they were as convincing as probably Argentina, that I do think was the most consistent, nation in the CONMEBOL. That said, I do feel that Ecuador, Colombia, and maybe Uruguay were a bit more convincing than Brazil overall. Though, if you look at the table, there is only 1 point between Ecuador, Colombia, Uruguay and Brazil. Colombia, Uruguay and Brazil all level in points, Ecuador above them by 1. But watching the games, I think I was more impressed by Ecuador and Colombia, and maybe Uruguay as well, than I was Brazil. But usually when it does come to the actual tournament, Brazil usually does show up, or will most likely show up more than the nations I did speak about. Let's move on to another nation in this group, that's Morocco. As of now, Morocco have been given the AFCON, the 2025 African Cup of Nations, which they were the hosts of. Controversial stuff that happened in the final, and eventually, even though they lost the game, they have now been awarded the cup or the championship. With that said though, Morocco, in the previous tournament in 2022 in Qatar, they became the very first nation and only nation from the CAF from Africa to ever reach the semi-final of a World Cup. Tremendous achievement there. They did that by beating both Spain in the round of 16 and Portugal in the quarterfinals to reach the semi-final. Funny thing about that is Morocco will be co-hosting the 2030 World Cup with both Spain and Portugal. Morocco were absolutely dominant in their group for the qualifying of this World Cup, winning all of their games and only conceding 2 goals. They were 9 points ahead of the team second in their group, that's Niger. So they're going into this World Cup looking extremely strong. They are the only team in the CAF to have a 100% record going into the 2026 World Cup. And interesting thing about Morocco, their very first 2 World Cups were the first 2 ones to be hosted by Mexico. Back in 1970, they were in a group stage, and in 1986, they actually made it out of the group stage at that World Cup. And they also qualified for the 1994 World Cup. So basically, every time the World Cup has been hosted by a CONCACAF nation or a nation in North America, they have been able to qualify for that. So this is now a 4th time. And again, they will become the 2nd nation from Africa to ever host the World Cup when they do eventually host it in 2030. Okay, let's move on to another nation in this group, and that is Haiti. They qualified for the first time back in 1974 in Germany. It's been a long wait, but Haiti have returned to the FIFA World Cup. Haiti did pretty well in the first, or should say 2nd round of the CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers. They were in a group with Corsica. Corsica also qualified for the 2026 World Cup. Corsica did beat Haiti. That was Haiti's only defeat, but Haiti was able to win their games against St. Lucia, Aruba and Barbados. So those two together was able to go through to the third and final round of the CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers, and then that round is where the nation would qualify. Now for Haiti, they were put in a really tough group with Honduras, Costa Rica and Nicaragua. Now Nicaragua haven't qualified for the World Cup before, but with Honduras and Costa Rica, they have qualified for World Cups more occasions than Haiti ever have. So it was a tough group for them. They drew their first two games with Honduras and Costa Rica, which was expected, but did get a win over Nicaragua. So they were undefeated in their first three games, which still was a good start for them. They would have a massive setback by losing to Honduras in their fourth match, but they would pick up a massive win against Costa Rica on match day 5. The final match day had Costa Rica drawing with Honduras, which meant Haiti needed to defeat Nicaragua, and if they did, they would qualify for their second World Cup. They beat them 2-0. Goals from Lucius and Providence in the first half took Haiti again to their second World Cup. Great moment for Haiti there, and good to see them return. And another returning nation, we have Scotland. Scotland made their debut at the World Cup for the first time back in 1954. They have competed in quite a few World Cups, but they've never been able to make it out of the group stage. Scotland was, I would say, in a tough group because of Denmark. The other teams in their group for qualifying was Greece and Belarus. I always thought it was going to come down to both Scotland and Denmark at the end, and it did. This match against Denmark was so good. I was watching it live in the pub. It was a brilliant match to watch. McTominay overhead kick, phenomenal in the 3rd minute, but Denmark was able to equalise in the second half. Højlund with a penalty. Scotland did go back in the lead. Shankland scored in the 78th minute. Only a few minutes later though, Djurgården would score, making it 2-2. Scotland needed to win this game. Denmark, it was fine for Denmark to draw. Scotland needed a win. Right at the end though, 3 minutes into extra time, or injury time, sorry, Tierney scored, and then they finished it off with McLean right at the end. I think that was a really good goal at the end, if I'm not mistaken, or Denmark was really trying to get a goal back and they left it. Yeah, I think they left themselves short or something, I can't remember. But yeah, great win for Scotland, and yeah, they've qualified for their first World Cup since 1998. You see if there's any history between any of these teams at previous World Cups. There is quite a fair bit actually, especially between Brazil and Scotland. They've competed a few times at the World Cup. First time ever was back in 1974 when Brazil did go into that tournament as the holders after winning the World Cup back in 1970. Ended in a 0-0 draw. Again, 1982 in Spain, Brazil beat Scotland 4-1. They'll beat them again in 1990, 1-0. And the last time they met at the World Cup, at least, Brazil beat them 2-1. Even in friendly games though, Brazil haven't lost to Scotland. It's always been Brazil. There's been a couple of draws. It's mentioned again the first time they met in a serious competition, or I should say in a competitive match. They did draw though in 1966. That's the first time they met each other in a friendly. Again, Brazil went into that friendly as the champions of the World Cup, or the holders after winning in 62. Brazil's also competed against Morocco in the group stage of that same World Cup as Scotland in 1998. Interesting enough, Brazil, Morocco and Scotland have all been in the same group before. At the 1998 World Cup, they were in Group A. Brazil did beat Morocco 3-0. And a year prior, they did meet in a friendly where Brazil were the champions after winning the 1994 World Cup. So they were the holders in 98. Brazil did also win that game 2-0. Morocco did beat Brazil most recent in a friendly a couple years ago. It was a 2-1 win for Morocco. And Brazil have met Haiti before. They met a couple of times in a friendly. And one time in the Copa America, Brazil was very dominant in that game though. They beat them 7-1. I think that was the Copa America in 2016. The first time Brazil did meet Haiti, that was in a friendly in 1974. Again, Brazil were the holders of the World Cup at that time. Again, after winning the 1970 World Cup. Haiti hasn't played either Scotland or Morocco at a World Cup before, or even in any friendly matches. So this will be a first, and Scotland and Morocco did also meet in the same group in 1998 as Brazil. Morocco won that game 3-0. That was the first and only time that Scotland and Morocco met at World Cup or in general. By the way, it was Norway was the nation that joined Morocco, Brazil and Scotland in Group A of the 1998 World Cup. I'll talk more about Norway in one of the other group videos because they also have returned to this World Cup. Okay, got nothing more to say about these four nations. Good luck to all four of them. I can see Brazil and Morocco being number 1 and 2 in this group. Scotland most likely may finish 3rd, and I like to be proven wrong, but I do think Haiti may end up being 4th in this group. Again, the top 2 teams are guaranteed to go through to the round of 32, the new round of 32, and potentially the team that does finish in 3rd can still have a chance to qualify for that next round. Okay, that was Group C. Next video I'll make will be about Group D. The nations in Group D are, as mentioned earlier, the host nation, the final host nation I'm going to talk about, and that's the USA. They are joined by Paraguay. Interesting enough, those 2 nations did meet back in 1930. Another nation in this group is Australia. They've been a regular at the World Cup since 2006. Since moving to the AFC. And finally, they will be joined by another nation from Europe. I'll discuss that group again in my next video. Thanks for watching, listening, appreciate it as usual. Please stay safe and bye for now.